and you've got the same segments. So I'm going to use 2 segments and convert that to an edible poly. Now I just want to select all those points. Sorry, before I do that, I'll just assign the same material. I'm going to inset those 4 polygons, use my regularize tool, and pull it in. So the reason why I'm saying it's better to do things in a bend modifier as opposed to starting from a cylinder is because you wouldn't usually get the luxury of preventing this from pinching unless the corners of your geometry flowed vertically and horizontally, so that when it was bending around the surface, you were minimizing the pinch that was created here. For inexperienced guys, you're probably not fully aware of what I'm talking about, but rather than teach you the bad techniques anyway, I'll just run you through this step by step. So I'm just going to select these inside points, swap to border mode, and just do a small bevel on the inside. You can do whatever you want here, it doesn't matter at this point. It's just to demonstrate how this does work on these rounded surfaces. And now if I add a turbo smooth modifier to this, you can see I've got that inside circular detail, but the outside's not really blending correctly. So what I want to do is I'm going to take that turbo smooth off. I'm going to go to the hierarchy tab and select effect pivot, and then up here in the snaps toggle box, if you right click that, it brings up an options box and gives you different options for snapping. By default, vertex will be off, but that will allow us to snap to the individual vertices. If you use edge and segment, it'll be on the edges, and it's all pretty self-explanatory. But for this, we're just going to use vertex and make sure it's actually on. Now when I move it, you can see that my pivot has been snapped to that point. So what I can do now is still with snap on, I can just drag this out and it'll exactly align on that other point. And now I just want to move out, because we've already got 1, I want to make 15 copies, so we've got a total of 16 circles on the outside. Now you can see we've got a whole bunch of duplicated objects, and I just want to turn off snap at this point, select all of these and hide unselected. And the reason I'm doing that is because the next step is going to be attaching all of these together. And if you use the attach options box, it will base your selection on anything that's visible in the scene. So just to speed up your selection, I just hide everything but what I want to snap together. And then I can just select all of them. So now that they're all snapped together, one small issue is that the borders aren't welded. And you can see there that they're actually not. So what I like to do is I like to go to border mode, select all of them, right click, and using here, I'm not sure if I've said this in previous lessons, but you can convert your selection to other sub-object modes. So for example, I've got my border selected. Now I can select the faces associated with that border, or I can go back to border mode and convert it to vertice. And what I want to do is I want to weld those together. The default welding mode here should just automatically weld those and not go too far. But if you do go too far, it is going to cause a lot of problems like this. So sometimes I like to just reset. And with little dialog boxes like this in Max, if you hold Alt down, it will slow down by a decimal point the rate at which you're increasing that. So if I let go, you can see it's moving up like kind of 0.1, 0.2, but as soon as I select Alt, that same distance I'm moving makes things go up 1/10 the size. You can see the before and after here. I just want to make sure that that's showing up correctly, and I'm just going to tick that off. And now you'll see if I select that vertice and move it, now we're all welded. Now there's one small issue here, and that's when I go to bend this object together, the point where they meet here isn't going to be welded. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a bend modifier, and using trial and error, because apparently in Max it never seems to be on the correct axis that you want it to, and if it is, congrats, you know, that's that 1 in 1,000 time. I find though that I usually have a 30% chance mathematically, but that never happens. And I'm just going to bend it on the x-axis until we line up here. So now what I was saying earlier is if we set the angle to 360 and add a turbo smooth to this, you'll see that these points don't line up. And the way we're going to prevent this object from causing pinching, even though the topology is not exactly how I'd like it, is I'm going to use one iteration of a turbo smooth and then weld those points together. And then apply the bend over the top of that. So you can see what happens is because we're bending an already turbo smoothed object, and if I take off that bend, we're bending this topology, we've already got the circle smoothing correctly on a flat surface. So when we bend that, it creates a perfect, no pinch kind of surface out here. But to fix up this point where we blend them, I'm just going to go to vertice mode, and at the edges of each, I'm just going to cut a little line down and target weld those up. And I'm going to do that for the same on the other side. Now when I bend, those points still line up correctly. So at this point, I'm just going to collapse the turbo smooth, and this is where you can see it's not completely ideal because our topology is quite high res now, but at the end of the day, we do have a perfectly smooth surface, and it does fix up a lot of those issues that you do experience when you already start from a cylinder. So I'm going to collapse the object, and on these points now, I can just go in and get rid of, sometimes it can be a bit fidgety, get rid of these points and control remove them. And now I'm just going to target weld these points in here so that we've got the same amount of topology as everywhere else coming in. I'm going to select these inside points, unselect everything else, and remove them. Now I'm going to go to border mode, swap to vertex, and do another weld. And now everything should be welded correctly, and when we view the end result, it should smooth fine. However, that's not always the case, and here's a perfect example of Max not behaving the way you want it to. So I can see what's happened is we've got a point here that might be overlapping itself and causing some issues. So in order to investigate that area, I'm just going to select the polygon and just try and figure out what's going on. You can see here we've got a point that's kind of overlapping and it's causing some weird smoothing errors for Max. So in order to fix that, sometimes when you do get errors like this, the easiest way is just to do a little bit of cleanup. So I'm going to select all of these and do a small chamfer, and you can see it's kind of messed up our object a little bit. But what this does do is it undoes that error that was created in terms of the overlap, but we still need to go in and clean it up. So I'm just going to go in and one by one weld these vertices back together. And now when we smooth, we've still got the issue down the bottom here. I need to go in and just chamfer that. Still got an overlap, and then we've kind of fixed that. So you shouldn't usually get problems like that, and I didn't get that issue during the first time I was creating the mesh, but it did happen the second time. So just be careful of that. and make sure that if you do see little issues with your Turbo Smooth, to go in and fix them up. Sometimes you just need to brute force it or hope that it doesn't happen in the first place. But now, when we've got that finished rounded surface, we can go into the border and do whatever we want kind of vertically now. You can pull it in, create a new shape. And if you have the same amount of points as we've got here, which should be 4 times the original 16 we had, you should be able to go in and merge any type of object like that, even if it was a different surface entirely, and weld it into this cylinder. So if I unhide these two, I'm just going to rotate, I'm just going to center the pivot here and rotate this and just roughly scale it here. And I'm going to center that to 0 and center this other piece I've created previously. I'm just going to get rid of this piece here. Get rid of the Turbo Smooth because we're going to connect these two, go into editable poly mode, and I can attach this, and now from the border they should line up. And there you go. So you can create any type of object you want and just keep blending those together. So whether it's a barrel of a gun on a minigun or something like that, you should be free to create kind of whatever shape you want. Okay, the next shape we have is a little bit similar to mixing these first two parts together, where we want to have a circular inset on a rounded surface, but going both directions. And for this, I'm going to show you another little trick that I didn't utilize in the Hard Surface Essential tutorial that can really save you some time when doing rounded surfaces like this and trying to keep that topology perfectly flowing and with no pinches. You can see as I rotate over it, the highlight remains pretty clean. It's not perfect. You can see if I go down here where these points merge, there's a little bit of a bend in it. But overall, when you're rendering something as small detailed as that from far away, you're just not going to notice it. And in all of my personal models, I've got similar tiny issues like this, but the overall way I construct them is to avoid visible pinching. So we'll create this piece the same way as all the others except the cylinder, and we'll just start from a flat plane. I'm going to make it slightly different just to show you how this method kind of universally applies. Just going to set a couple of segments here. I'm going to extrude this out. And then up. So I've got a slightly different shape this time. Now, before I go in and create the vertical bend, I'm just going to go in and create all the details that we want for this surface. So I'm going to create 2 circles down the bottom here. So first I just inset those 4 polygons. Then with all of them selected, I can just regularize both of those and pull it in. Up the top here, I'm just going to select all of these together and inset them. And then I'm going to delete these 2 points at the top. Just going to pull this detail in a little bit. And there we go. For the outside, before I bend this, I just want to make sure that that topology on the edge is flowing nicely. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to delete half of the mesh and apply a symmetry modifier to it. And then on this edge, I just want to select all these points and chamfer. It's actually caused a little bit of an issue down here, so the easier way to do this is I'm just going to cut it in manually. That's what I usually resort to anyway. When we get these triangular points, I can just weld those, select it, and then move it up. Same for here, and then just move it down. Just going to clean this point up, add the symmetry. I'm going to add a little bit of a edge here as well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a turbo smooth to this. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to delete these inside points. And now I'm going to add a turbo smooth over the top of these two. And from here, what I can do is I can put a bend modifier on. You can see we're creating that bend. And because we've added the turbo smooth already, we're not getting pinching. Whereas if you were to create this any other way, it's most certainly going to create pinching unless you're doing it from CAD or something like that. So I'm just going to use one turbo smooth because I think that's enough to avoid any serious visible pinching, but sometimes you will need to collapse it at 2 turbo smooths. So with that collapsed, I can select this border edge, and pull it in, and because it's bent here, I'm just going to flatten that. Now I've got a nice even point. Now the next thing I can do is select all these points. I'm just going to hide everything else. Select all these points along the edge. And this is a cool little trick. I might just go down and select just a little bit more. And I'm going to put an FFD modifier on. So I'm going to put a 4x4 FFD. And with all of those selected, what I can do is I can select the control points. And now with an FFD selected, when I move this, it will create a nice even bend. And I can scale those points, pull this in, and scale these points in a little bit more, and pull those in. Maybe go back to the top points and just flatten those a bit and pull them in. And then I can collapse this. And because I've done it with an FFD, it's going to not cause any extra pinching because it's doing it evenly. So now, because I've bent these circles, they might be a little bit out of alignment. And in order to reduce some of that polygon footprint, I'm going to select these inside edge loops, select the borders, and just re-regularize those to create another circle. And I'm going to do that here as well. I can just go in here and create an edge loop in between these points as we've done previously and put a turbo smooth on. So it's created a little bit of a pinch there, and that's because I've regularized that. So if I just go back and show you what it's like without doing that, it should smooth perfectly fine. And there you go. You've created a nice clean shape that's bending in multiple places. If you do run into a little point here, you can see if I go from the very far angle, there's a little bit of a pinch. So in order to get rid of that, what you might need to do is connect in between these points. Get rid of these. And if needed, what I can do is I can use flow connect in between here. So we use that on the car at some point. So in the tools up the top here, go to loops, and then flow connect, and just connect a point in between. And now I can just weld this, and it should reduce that effect we had earlier of it being really messy. So there's another quick way to make shapes like that. So we've got one more piece to tackle in this lesson, and that's creating a kind of bevel on the edge of a hard pillar or those type of old Roman details. They can be used to create sci-fi details though also, but in general it's just a cool little trick to create nice topologically correct bevels. To start this last piece, I'm just going to drag out a box. Convert it to an editable poly. Just going to hide these two and assign our material. And I'm just going to delete these excess geometry. The next thing I want to do is extend out these points so that we've got an area to actually chamfer. And then using the chamfer's option box, I'm just going to drag it out. The next thing I want to do is connect on the inside here, and then connect these 2 points with G. Now I can select this entire edge loop and do a chamfer on it. Then I can select these loops, do a chamfer on these, and for this particular loop, I want to add 2 segments, and what we'll be left with is these triangles on the inside here. So in order to get rid of those and create hardness on this side of the bevel, what I like to do is I just go to the vertice mode and just connect up, and you'll see as usual I'm not doing that perfectly. And I found even in my latest Octane test, just doing things a little bit not so perfect actually helps the realism, because when I was rendering the areas that I'd modeled absolutely perfectly, it just, something seemed off. But then there was areas that I was rendering that had tiny little wobbles and dings in them, and they appeared to be a little bit more handmade and constructed. So for the same down here, I'm just going to vertice mode, and I'm just going to connect these points. And you can see now this point here is a 4-sided polygon. And if I really wanted to create like a razor-like hardness on the inside here, I could go in and add 2 more points. And if I put a turbo smooth on, I'll show you what that's doing. Now we've kind of got a bevel that's leading into this shape. Got a little bit of pinching here. And in order to minimize that, we need to go in and add some support loops on the inside. Now you can see the pinching's not visible, and we've got a nice clean bevel with flowing topology that's quite low res. Let me just select all these things that we've created in the lesson. I'm just going to assign the same wireframe color. So that about wraps up the lesson, and I hope you can see the importance of creating small objects like this and little detailed items, so that when it comes time to including them in your characters and your designs, you've got a very good understanding of what works, what doesn't, and how to avoid pinching when you do include those small details. I always like to do things in kind of layers. So as you saw in our previous lessons working with the blueprints, the first stage is blocking out the main topology and getting that flowing correctly. Then we can start going in and refining some smaller details and cuts. And then the last step is doing things like this, where you are adding little bolt heads, rivets, and insets. I want you guys to keep practicing and possibly come up with your own, so that in the next lesson, if you do have any questions about how to create little details like this, I can fully cover it. Thanks heaps for sticking around for this lesson. This is the first free lesson in the course. For the guys who haven't subscribed and are just watching this as a free lesson, there's going to be over 20 lessons in the Mastering Hard Surface course. This is just one small little part of the entire course that covers a whole range of different subjects. But I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I'll see you next time. Thanks heaps, guys.